Hi everyone, thanks for coming back for part 2. I thought it was interesting as I was watching the playback that the word Memphis comes up right up against the word rend over here in this table, and that's almost identical to the map of Egypt where you have the Nile River going through Egypt, and right by the river you have a city called Memphis. And then when you look at the US map, you have the path of the eclipse, which goes through Tennessee, and the capital of Tennessee is Memphis. And then Memphis is also right by the Mississippi River, which cuts the U.S. in half. And so all of this is identical to the table where the word rend is parallel with the word USA, and then right by the word rend, which would seem to represent where the U.S. is split in half by the Mississippi River, and then by that you have the word Memphis. So all three are identical. The other thing that was interesting is that it's in verse 7 that it mentions the midst. You see the midst mentioned twice in verse 7. Of course, there's two eclipses that will cross in the midst, or that cross in the midst when you overlay them on top of each other. Of course, this one took place in the year 7, and so it's in verse 7 that it talks about the midst. And of course Psalm 117 is in the midst of the entire Bible, and that's really what this is all about. It's all about crossing through the midst of the Red Sea, the Mount of Olives being split in the midst. This is all a representation of what's going to take place with the restoration of the temple. And over here where it's talking about the rivers being dry, I believe this also alludes to this as well. And I believe it also alludes to the Euphrates being dried up, which is something I can talk more about as well. But I wanted to go ahead and finish reading the rest of this matrix. And I believe I stopped after verse 13, so I'll start over here. Actually, I think I read verse 14, so I'll start over here with verse 15, where it says, "And I will pour my wrath upon sin, the stronghold of Egypt, and I will cut off the multitude of No, and I will set a fire in Egypt. Sin shall be in great anguish, and No shall be broken up, and Memphis shall have adversaries in the daytime." And so I looked up the word No in Ezekiel, and okay, it's in verse 15, and so it would be this word right here, which actually was the ancient capital of Egypt. Okay, so No refers to the capital, but I also thought it was interesting when you go back up to the first part of Ezekiel 30. Over here in verse 5, it's mentioning Ethiopia, Libya, Lydia, and all the mingled people, and Chub and the men of the land that is in league shall fall with them by the sword. And these are all mentioned in Ezekiel 38, 39, when these nations are in league with Gog in the Gog and Magog war. And over here where it's talking about mingled people, of course this is referring to the fallen angels, the iron mixed with the clay. Okay, so now I want to go over this table next, but I want to explain why I believe 31 and 33 are actually synonymous with the year 2017, and I believe that's because it was in 31 AD when Jesus died on the cross. This is when the Messiah was cut off, and this is when the new covenant was made in 31 AD, and I believe this is in line with the pattern over here with the blood moons occurring in 2014 to 2015. And so this would be synonymous with the year 31 AD because that's when the Messiah was cut off, and then three and a half years or 3 years from this point on would be 2017 to 2018. So I believe this would represent 33 AD, or the number 33 would represent this time frame over here. But overall, this entire pattern represents the Feast of Unleavened Bread, starting with the 9th and the 10th, when the atonement sacrifice is chosen. And then, of course, it was on the 14th of Nisan when Jesus died on the cross. This was the time of the crucifixion, was on the 14th of Nisan. And then, of course, Jesus resurrected on the 3rd day, which would have been the 17th of Nisan, going into the 18th. It was just before dawn on Sunday morning on the 17th, or on the 18th of Nisan, that Jesus rose from the dead. And so this would also represent the year 33 AD. So either 31 AD or 33 AD would represent the cutting off, and therefore it would also represent the moment that the prophecy picks back up again. And I believe this is confirmed by Jeremiah 31, which is where this table came up in. The sun and moon merge, Thio, Leo, Lion, Regal, which is the Hebrew word for Regulus. And over here it talks about the new covenant in verses 31 through 33. And of course it was 31 AD when Jesus made the new covenant. And this goes through to verse 33 where it's talking about the new covenant. And I believe this is alluding to both the making of the new covenant at 31 AD and the second half of the confirming of the covenant. Because if you actually look at this in the Greek, and I might show that to you later, but it actually, the way it's parsed, it says that well, I think probably over here in 33 it says that they will be covenanted. The house of Israel will be covenanted. So it will be the confirmation of the covenant. It's not just the making of the covenant. So it's the second half of the 70th week of the confirming of the covenant that Israel will be covenanted at that time. And this also, I believe, is confirmed with this table over here, which reads Trump, Spearhead, Tip, Adam, War, which came up in the second book of Kings, chapter 11, and it was in verse 17 where it says, and Yehuda made a covenant between Jehovah and the king and the people, that they should be Jehovah's people between the king also and the people. So this is this word Yehuda means Yah knows. So this is talking about God making a covenant between Jehovah and the king and the people. So that would be God and Jesus and the people, that they should be Jehovah's people between the king also and the people. So this is Jesus confirming the covenant in verse 17. And I've made a video about all the scriptures that come up in either verse 17 or chapter 17 that talk about the covenant, which would be the everlasting covenant. All the covenants in the Old Testament pointed to the everlasting covenant. They were all a type and shadow of the everlasting covenant that was confirmed by Jesus, and you see it mentioned in chapter 17 or verse 17, where it talks about the Noahic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. They all seem to be connected with the number 17 or the number 27, which is when Jesus came to confirm the covenant in 27 AD. And of course, the book of Daniel is the 27th book of the Bible. And like I said earlier, I believe 2017 is synonymous with the number 27. And I have more reasons for believing that, which I could talk about perhaps in another video, that I could talk just about the number 27. But I believe there's a parallel between the number 17 and the number 27 concerning the covenant, as well as the numbers 31 through 33 refer to the confirming of the covenant, and I believe they refer to the making of the covenant in 31 AD and the second half of the confirming of the covenant, which runs through 33 AD. But I believe that the number 33 also represents the cutting off of the Messiah, because going back to the eclipse chart, which would be right here, the Messiah was cut off on Nisan 14th. This was the time of the crucifixion, but it was 3 days later, on the 17th, that Jesus rose. So if this entire timeline represents the 7 years, if it represents the 7 days, then it would start from the 14th, and then the resurrection would be on the 17th. So this would parallel with 33 AD, because 31 would be here and 33 would be here. So 33 also represents 2017, as well as 31 represents 2017. Depends on whether you're looking at this in terms of years or in terms of the week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that's also the same with the number 14, because 14 was when the Messiah was cut off on Nisan 14th. And so this year represents the cutting off of the Messiah, but the veil being rent and the cutting off of the Messiah is also prophetic of when Jesus comes back, where the prophecy picks up again, and then the Mount of Olives is split. And 14 is 7 plus 7. So this also, the number 14 also represents the year 2017. So both this part of the timeline and this part of the timeline represent 2017. And I hope that wasn't too complicated, but I believe this is also confirmed in this table over here, where I had put in neutron war, USA atom, and it came up in Isaiah 37, but it was in verses 31 through 33, where it was talking about the remnant escaping from the house of Judah. And it says, and the remnant that is escaped to the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and out of Mount Zion they that shall escape. The zeal of Jehovah of hosts will perform this. Therefore thus saith Jehovah concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come unto the city, nor shoot an arrow there, neither shall he come before it with shield, nor cast up a mound against it. I believe it's also confirmed in Deuteronomy chapters 31 through 33, and this is just a really short summary of those 3 chapters, but it's in chapter 31 where it talks about Moses being 120 years old, which would line up with the 120 Jubilees, and this was just before the death of Moses, but then it talks about the death of Moses actually taking place in verse 33, and these all seem to be prophetic of the end as well. And the 120 Jubilee starts with chapter 31 and goes through to chapter 33. Okay, and I'm sorry it took so long to explain that, but I'll finish going over this table on USA Babylon split, rent, and terror that comes up with 31 matches in Psalms 1, 36, and 37 in the next video, because I'm about out of time. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.